Welcome back to the Willy Bragg Show, everyone. Told y'all I will be back, and as I promised, here I am back again, and I have a guest. I have a guest here, Dr. Sherry Weiss. Welcome back, Sherry. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing, Willie?
I'm doing good. Yeah, I'm doing good. Just it was my night off yesterday. I had the weirdest day. I lost 41 pounds, by the way.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Congratulations.
So I'm not as pudgy as I used to be. So, but I lost 80 pounds about 11 years ago. But when COVID
Wow.
happened, I never got COVID. But when COVID happened, they locked the gyms down, and I didn't have access to the gym equipment. Therefore, I got kind of my fault, but I
Mhm.
got lazy, and all the progress I made just it all came back. But taking some drugs by the doctor, and it's been very helpful. And I'm hoping that I can keep the progress going. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, congratulations. That's
yeah.
really great.
I felt the best I felt prior to COVID.
Oh, great. That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah. I feel like I'm in my 40s again, and I'm in my mid 50s now. So,
Well, congratulations. That's really wonderful.
and,
Good news.
and congratulations to your retirement, by the
Well,
way.
thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah. And actually, I should probably be taking better care of myself, actually, now that I have more opportunity. And I have a little bit. But so anyway, but it's been kind of an odd, unusual time with the government shutdown and all of this stuff and all this commotion with the tariffs and everything. But uh, still, I guess I could be spending a little more time taking better care of myself, and I certainly should use you as an inspiration. So,
Well, I mean, I take a shot every Tuesday or Wednesday, so
hmm
that's my secret. So
hmm
and um, my doctor was good enough to give me uh some free samples. That
that's
it's
nice.
expensive. That stuff is expensive. Yeah,
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 yeah, I'm sure it is. I'm sure
yeah.
it is.
So I
So,
was taking Zepbound. I was taking now I'm on Wigori, and when that runs out, I'm going on Ozempic and see
mhm.
how that works. So, but
For me, what seems to work best is just to maybe skip some meals. And it actually it is kind of nice because nowadays it seems that's a lot more acceptable. In the past, they always said, well, you should eat, not skip any meals. But now there's this fasting, a partial fasting is a lot more acceptable. And that actually has worked for me in the past.
well,
So.
I can go now. I don't really think about food the way I used to. It's kind of like it's an afterthought. It's like when I'm done. I work graveyard shift, and when I'm done at night and the morning and I get out, I'm hungry. And instead of being like violently hungry, starving, I'm like I'm kind of hungry. It's like something to eat's kind of nice. So um, it's a temperament that's kind of changed, and something that's got like a mental block that craving is no longer there. It's so nice. I love it.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Yeah. So, but speaking of eating and food and all of that, I and last night I went to Denny's and I had a sirloin steak
Hmm.
and all of that, and I was just thinking, just a lot of Trump said the prices were going to start coming down when he became president, but I don't see any sign of it. So,
Yeah, and it's not likely to with respect to beef. Not for quite a while, and we'll get into that. But yeah, it's one issue, and then I want to talk a little bit about this as we go forward. Is the what we have is a situation where the cattle inventory, and of course, the main source of the main input in the production of beef is going to be cattle. And we actually have the lowest cattle inventory that we have had since the early 1950s. And so that is really the big problem. We just don't really have the cattle, and so historically, what we've done is imported cattle to to supplement our beef consumption, because we are really even though we do export some beef, we are actually a net beef importer, and that is not a situation that's going to change. But of course, then that brings us to the issue of the tariffs. Of course, one of our main sources of beef in recent years has been Brazil, which has been hit with a 50% tariff. So that's what we're going to be talking about, is tariffs, the beef sector, and all that kind of stuff. So I wanted to start off a little bit by first talking a bit about what I did before I retired, because it actually relates to some of this stuff. I was a livestock economist for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and I worked in the agricultural marketing service. One of the things that I did, and a big part of what I did, was evaluate food purchases for the commodities that we purchased, and then these things would go to food banks, school lunches, schools for school lunches, even like senior centers and things like that. And one part of that job was doing economic evaluations of industries that are in distress. And again, I dealt with the livestock sector, so I dealt specifically with proteins, and we had a separate group that dealt with dairy. We had another group that dealt with fruit and vegetables. And so what I did was, there is a law that regulates agriculture. There's kind of the granddaddy of all the agricultural laws is the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which was passed in the 1930s. And in that act, there is something called, they never really gave it a title. It's just called Section 32 because it's Section 32 of the act. And what it does is it deals with the issue of, you remember from your history books that, in the Great Depression, farmers, there were times when commodities, or when crops the prices on the market were so low that it wasn't really worth even for the farmers to take the products to market. So they were dumping milk, they were dumping corn, they were, slaughtering animals and just, burying them. And this was because they couldn't afford to take the stuff to market. And so we had this, we had this paradox of, people going hungry, not being able to buy food, at the same time, farmers not being able to get paid enough to bring their food to market. And so Henry Wallace, who was FDR's ag secretary at that point in time, he supported this program, which eventually became what we now call Section 32. And it is basically what it enabled USDA to do was take money from tariffs, the collection of tariffs. So up to 30% of the tariff fees could be used to purchase commodities that were in surplus, and then use those commodities that were purchased to be distributed to food banks, the schools, the needy. And so this was an unusual thing. So this started in the 30s, and it was the first time anything like that had been done. And so what happened was, how it worked was, if an industry was in distress and they needed help, they could send a letter to the Secretary of Agriculture. And then the first thing that happened was, it would go to me or someone like me. And my job was to do an economic analysis to determine whether or not the industry's claims of distress were valid and whether or not we should actually make the purchase. And so that was a lot of what I did. And I worked with catfish farmers. I worked with pork producers. I worked with many, all the different protein industries. And then we started working a lot actually with fish as well. So we were buying a lot of fish from Alaska and then also New England and even shrimp from the Gulf of Mexico, because what had happened was, in 2022, I think it was, there started to be an excess of farmed shrimp on the market, and it really hurt the Gulf producers. And so that was a part of the job that I really liked a lot, because it was helping the industry, but also it was providing food for food banks and things like that. And part of what the purpose of this program was to be able to expose people to these products. So we often had the situation where, for instance, with catfish, people may have gotten catfish at the food bank and then never had it before, and they would then call up the processor whose name was on the stuff, the products that they got. And then so part of the purpose of Section 32 was to expose consumers. So that was nice. And I really enjoyed that. So I was familiar with tariffs, obviously, as an economist. And they're just, a tax on imported goods. So it's just that it's not until this administration, we still continue to have tariffs. We just haven't used them to the extent that this administration is planning to. We used them a lot in the 1800s to develop industries, but since then we've actually kind of gotten away from them. So,
yeah, the thing is, I sort of always viewed myself as a protectionist and all of that, and I was very disconcerting about all these tariffs that the administrations have waived recently. Is having the effects it's having on the economy, that in the future, when when the country gets some semblance of sense, if we don't go into a dark fascist period, an actual fascist state. Sorry for the hyperbole there, but maybe. When people talk about protecting industry through tariffs and all that, I get a little worried that people won't take it seriously, because it'd be like the administration and all of this. But but my point is that it just takes. It takes special, planning and all of that, and we got somebody who's just, like in the past, when tariffs were used responsibly in the past, and it seems like it's just not being waged responsibly. It's done out of emotion or something.
Yeah. Actually, as we talk through this discussion, I think you can see, the thing of it is what's happened over the decades. I mean, we've had this period since the 1970s where we really kind of replaced the economy. We had one economy, and we basically replaced it with a different economy. Mm-hmm. And that economy in the 1970s had a lot of manufacturing. There were a lot of jobs where we built things, we put things together, we created things and physical things, and then of course these jobs were jobs that they had high value and they paid good wages. And what happened was we made a choice. And I think a lot of, and this is not just through any one administration. It's not through any one party. And it's really, this was a choice that was made at high levels, even probably above the government, where they decided, well, we're gonna shift and make the U.S. more of a financial economy, we financialized industry. We moved production overseas. These were decisions that were not made by the workers, but were made by the people at the top. The corporate heads and stuff. Jack Welch, lots of other people at the top of the banks and everything. They consciously made these choices to push manufacturing overseas and create and make this more of an information and service based economy. And it sounded good at the time.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Yeah. We're going to cut down on pollution. We're going to have cleaner industries. We're going to have this, that, the other thing. But there wasn't a recognition that a lot of workers were not going to be able to find a home. Find a work home, and instead there were just assumptions made that, oh yeah, well, we can train them for coding, blah blah blah, and we completely changed our economy, and that's really unfortunate. And so now what's happening is, this plan has been, well, we're going to revert back to that old economy, but you don't do that, in the course of even one administration. This took decades to undo, and it's going to take decades to undo. And for instance, with the beef sector, one of the things that's interesting is that we don't produce beef the way there are some farms that produce beef, like raise cows, have babies, raise them all the way through the full production cycle, and then send them off to market. But in fact, the industry has become both more kind of, I guess you'd call fragment. I'm not sure if fragmented is correct, but basically, you have cow-calf producers, and those are producers that are in part of the country where they like a lot. They actually operate all over the country. There's quite a few of them in Florida, but they're all over the country. So these might be small operators where they raise a cattle to wean. They breed the cattle. They raise the calf to wean, and then after the cattle is weaned at about a year, then they move on to become a new stage, and that stage occurs at a different farm, and that's called backgrounding. And then there's a third stage, which is feeding. And so basically, in other words, the cattle production occurs in steps. It doesn't necessarily occur at all in the same place. And it's different, even different ownership. So you can have maybe 3 different ownerships of a cow, from an animal. And so anyway, it's very, I guess in a way it's kind of been broken apart into pieces. And then, but at the same time, what's happened is at the end of it, so you have a lot of decentralization in the early stages of the production, but the final production stage for the animal is actually, there's been a lot of consolidation in that area. And so that's where you have the big packers. And so anyway, well, sorry, I'm kind of going off in a different direction, but let me start off by saying this. The talk about importing beef from Argentina, it's not going to really make a whole lot of difference in terms of prices. We do have a small herd right now, and Trump is talking about increasing cattle imports from Argentina from 20,000 metric tons to 80,000 metric tons. And basically, so that means cattle imports going from 44 million pounds, this is just from Argentina, to about 178 million pounds, which sounds like a lot. But the actual amount that we actually consume in the beef in the U.S. is like 28 billion pounds a year. So, yeah, yeah. So we're talking about less than 0.5% of additional cattle, additional beef being added to the supply. So less than 0.5%, and so it's really not going to affect the price. And so now, on the other hand, we can look at Brazil. So Argentina is actually one of the top 10 importers now, right? Even though we only import about, even though there's the limit of importation is 20,000 metric tons. They produce there, but they only provide about 2% of the beef. Now, Brazil is a different matter. Brazil's typically in the top 5 for cattle production. For cattle imports. So Brazil's one of our top 5 importers, and Argentina is one of our top 10. And we, like last year, 23% of the beef that was imported came from Brazil. So right now, the fact that we have a 50% import tariff on Brazil, that's definitely going to hurt. And in fact, it's not going to be enough. The amount that we would be able to import from Argentina, the additional amount that we'd be able to import from Argentina wouldn't really compensate for the loss of what we lose from Brazil. And so anyway, but the thing of it is that so it hurts us not being able to import from Brazil. It hurts us the fact that we have the additional tariff from Brazil. Adding that additional beef from Argentina isn't going to help a whole lot. And then the other thing is, as far as right now, for the immediate term, right now we're heading into the time of year when we tend to buy beef. The beef market you can think of it in terms of like 2 types of cuts. 2 types of products. There's boneless beef, and that's kind of the bulk of it. And then there's beef cuts. Okay. So boneless beef is basically hamburger. And then beef cuts are, basically your steaks, your briskets, things like that. Right. And so most of the beef that we import, how it's actually consumed is it's brought in big boxes called combos, like 2,000 pound boxes. And it's just like a big thing of meat. And that meat is actually used to make hamburger, because how we produce beef in this country is that we raise the beef. As I said, that last stage of beef production is actually is when we give them a lot of we're trying to put a lot of weight on them fast, because they've grown to their full height, but now they're getting fattened up. And so what happens is, when we produce that beef in what's called a feedlot, they get a lot of fat. They get a lot of fat added to them. They get fatty, and so a lot of that extra fat that gets produced gets mixed with the with imported beef, which tends to be more lean, and that's where we get our hamburger. And so imported beef will mainly be going to hamburger. So it's not going to help with like steak prices or anything like that. And as we head into this period of right now, we're heading into a time when people tend to buy more, like for the holidays, mostly people tend to buy more of the higher end cuts. So they tend to buy like rib roasts and tenderloins and stuff like that. And so any additional beef that we might get from Argentina isn't going to really help with that as well. So, so anyway.
I was wondering if it had anything to do with Javier Milei and the $40 billion bailout, and maybe it's a way of trying to rescue that wreck of an economy by saving his administration. And that's a bipartisan thing because I think Biden supported, I think that they both, Trump and Biden, supported Milei because I think they were both trying to prevent Argentina, in my opinion, from joining BRICS. But
yeah, right. Yeah, they did, and they did. They were trying to do that. Yeah. So what happened was that first 20 billion that they said they're giving as a what is Besant saying? He was saying Besant was he was saying it's a line of credit. He's given them a $20 billion line of credit. Well, so what happened was then they, of course, as you probably know, that they that enabled them. I can answer that in a minute. That 20 billion, what it did, it was enable them, I guess, to lower their tariffs so that they could sell soybeans to the Chinese. So they sold the soybeans that they didn't the Chinese didn't buy from our farmers. The thing is, buying the beef isn't that, it's not that big of a deal in terms of being beneficial for Argentina, because it's not like they had a huge amount of excess beef hanging around. They only produce like a quarter of the amount of beef that we produce. And they consume 3/4 of their beef. So they have, and then they're able to export it. They export beef to China, which is actually their main customer. And we are their second customer in a typical year. And so it's not the case that that we're doing them a huge favor by buying a bunch of beef. It's more, I think, it might be more that it helps the Brazilian processors that because there's basically some Brazilian processors that also operate in Argentina. And so it's most likely the case that those Brazilian processors that are not selling to the U.S., selling Brazilian beef to the U.S. because of the tariffs, can now sell Argentinian beef to the U.S. And so it might be more the case that it's doing a favor to the Brazilian beef processors, and one of them is the Batista family, and they're also they're a family that is known to have it's had its brushes with the law. So anyway, but the question about imported hamburgers mixed with the U.S., yes, it does become a U.S. product. And actually, that's an interesting subject matter as well, the whole issue of country of origin labeling, because we don't have country of origin labeling for beef and pork in the U.S. I mean, not mandatory. We can have, a company can go ahead and say, oh, this is a product of the U.S. or whatever, but we no longer have mandatory country of origin labeling. We had it for a little while with respect to pork and beef, but we no longer have it. But basically, how it worked before was if it is brought into the U.S., it is considered a product of the U.S. When we did have mandatory country of origin labeling, they actually required more specification. So it could say born in Mexico, raised in the U.S., raised and slaughtered in the U.S., or something like that. So.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting how they, you know, how they kind of bypass the made in America, you know, and how misleading it can be too at times and all.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. See, the thing of it is I think it's really unfortunate because, we don't get a lot of information about how things operate in many industries in this country. And so what happened was during the, when we passed NAFTA, what it enabled us to do was to have, and I'm not saying this is bad or good, whatever, but what it enabled us to do was have more of a free flow of animals and meat between the Canada and Mexico, and so what happened was uh, we we've we continue to get a lot of animals that come in from Canada, and the cattle that come in from Canada tend to be slaughtered, but the cattle that come in from Mexico tend to be feeder cattle, and so they've gone through the weaning and they're in that second stage now where they're going to be backgrounded, or they could be in that third stage where they're just going to be fed, and then ultimately they will be slaughtered. And so when we had country of origin labeling, it actually would say specifically born in Mexico, born and raised in Mexico, slaughtered in the U.S. or something like that. So we were able to get that information, but they rolled it back. They rolled it back.
Well,
So they took it. So, yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. And I didn't see that last question.
It was a comment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was it time here shipped to Canada and fed? Oh, I didn't know that, huh? That's interesting. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'm learning a lot about beef that I never really thought about. Never really. I mean, I know where I do get my beef from primarily as far as quality, but I never think about where it came from and all that.
Yeah. And and the thing of it is like, well, we can buy, we know where clothes come from, and we buy many things that we'll say where it came from. I personally prefer the country of origin labeling because I think it informs people, and it helps people understand what's going on. When you have no information, you really don't have any idea, and there's nothing wrong with international trade, and but I think people should be, it's useful for people to understand what's going on in the country, and many people have no idea that we're buying meat from other countries and blending it and stuff. So do you mind if we look at those slides and then we can
Yeah. Okay. You want me to start with the first one
let's start with figure one, because what I want to do is I just want to explain what the situation is and why we have so few cattle right now to begin with. Okay. But I also want to talk about, in addition, so this was, I think, figure two.
Is that figure two? Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
That's fine.
Yeah. I had it. Let me take care of this.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry for the graphs, but I'm an economist, so.
Oh, no problem. No problem.
That's what we do.
Oh, I think this is the one. Okay, my bad. Okay, that's the one.
Yeah. Okay, so, and this is, I know it's kind of silly because it goes way back to the 1860s. But but what's important is to understand that what we had this massive growth in the cattle herd over the centuries, over the decades, as of course our population grew and the economy grew and everything. Now, what you notice there is there's a lot of ups and downs in that graph, right? Starting in after the 1890s, there's a lot of places, lumps. And the reason that's what we call the cattle cycle. All animal production has some kind of a cycle. And those cycles come about because of combination of natural features of the animal as well as economic things and just things that happen. And so what that means is you have periods where there's a lot of cattle, and then there's periods where there's not as many. And part of that is when you have something like chicken or pork, they reproduce, they grow a lot faster, and so the cycles happen a lot faster. And so when you look at a long-term graph like this, where you're looking over a couple, really like a century and a half, multiple decades, if you were going to plot out the pork one or the chicken ones, you wouldn't really see these cycles quite. You might not be able to see the cycles very well. And oh, hi Jimmy. And because the miss you too, Jimmy, because the cycles move a lot faster. And so what happens is this with these cycles are you get these periods of when the herd is down, basically because what happens is it takes a long time to raise an animal, to raise a cow. I mean, to raise cattle so it's like 4 years from the time that you decide, okay, I want to increase my herd, to the time when you actually start making money off that, because it takes 10 months for cattle, to breed. So it takes 10 months from the time you breed the cattle to when that baby is born, and then it takes another couple of years till that animal is big enough to reach market. And so what happens is you oftentimes have these cycles where, due to economic factors and then the timing of the herd, and everything. So you have periods where there's a lot of animals, and then there's periods when there's not so many animals. And that's called the cattle cycle. So right now we are in the down phase of the cattle cycle. And if you look at the most current year, and that has 2024, this graph is a little bit out of date, but if you had included 2025 in there, it would actually show an even lower number than 2024. And so what that is saying is we are on the bottom, we're in the trough of the cycle. And but yet at the same time, if you notice, that total number of animals peaked in like 1976. Mm-hmm. And it's been going down ever since. Why? Well, part of it is because we developed a fear of fat, right? And so the fear of fat and the concern about cholesterol caused people to cut back on eating beef. And so that's what's happened is over time, there's been just an extreme, and there's been this decrease in beef and in demand for beef because of fears of that it was not healthy. Now there's been recent revelations that have come out and said, oh, this is not as much of a problem and blah blah blah, and so now we've kind of reversed that, and that's also part of why now we have this strong demand for beef, because used to be for a long time people were trying to get away from eating red meat, and now we have a lot more people who say, okay, red meat's good, I need to increase my protein. Do you mind if we switch to the next slide?
Oh yeah, we can do that. Give me a second here. All right, that'll be the one that I mistakenly put up a moment ago. All right, let me do that. Let's see. Oh, hold on. Sorry about that. Let's see. Okay, hold on. Let's see. No, that's not it. That was. I think that's the one. Okay, hold on. That's the one, right?
That's it. That's
Okay,
it.
cool.
Okay,
Right.
so what this slide actually shows is this is actually a truncation. Part of what this graph shows is a truncation of the previous graph. So that little dotted line is actually the cattle inventory, right? So it's just from what 1988, 88, I think it is. Sorry, let me see. Gotta read. It starts at 1999. Okay. From the year 1990 on, it's that graph chunked off, right? But it also overlays on the other side commercial beef production. So the dotted line is the number of cattle we have, and the red line is the amount of beef that is being produced. Now, one thing I do want to say is when we talk about cattle, these cattle are not just beef cattle. There's milk cattle in there too, but most of them are beef cattle. Okay, and so the red line is somewhat consistent, sort of a little bit with the dotted line, but it's not totally, because there's other things that come in. We produce beef not just from the number of animals we have. We also import meat, and so that will be added to the beef production. But I want to but one thing you can see there is that there's a huge, as you move towards the more recent times, there's a big gap between the number of animals and the amount of beef production. Now, these things aren't one-to-one, right? Because we have two different axes. There's an axis on the left-hand side that measures the number of head, and then there's an axis on the right-hand side that measures the number of pounds of beef that's produced. So they're not going, it's not a one-to-one thing necessarily. But the fact that there's this huge gap between those two lines, what that is telling me is that we are becoming more and more efficient at the way we produce beef. In other words, we got fewer and fewer animals being raised, but yet we still can produce a lot of beef. How is that? Of course, part of it is imports, but part of it is also that we are working these animals a lot harder than we used to. In other words, what we're doing is we're putting in a lot more weight onto these animals. And in fact, I won't show you this graph, but I have a graph that shows the difference between the size of the animals in Argentina and Brazil, and blah, 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 and then the U.S. And U.S. cattle are almost twice as big, weigh almost twice as much as the animals, as the cattle from Argentina, right? And that's because we slaughter them when they're older, but we also pack on a lot more weight. So what we're doing is we don't have as many animals, but we're trying to get as much meat on those animals as we possibly can. Now, I guess in one way, Donald's this tariff is kind of going to help, because since we're not selling soybeans, there'll be a lot more soybeans available to feed those cattle. But, the problem is this is not a good long-term solution. So anyway. Okay. Now, I want to talk a little bit about why there are so few cattle. So if you don't mind, can we move to the next slide?
I'll be glad to. All right, let's do that. Okay, let me get to it. All right, let's see. Share screen. All right, let's see. I think that'll be this one. No, not this one. That one. That's not that one. Is it this one or is this one? let's see. Is it this one?
Number 3. Let's see. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, okay. But before I get into that, let me just say this. Look at what has happened as a result of the lack of beef available. What we see is that beef has increased 20%. This is sorry, I shouldn't say beef. This is the price of slaughter steels in the Southern Plains, right? And this is, of course, one of the big markets for cattle. Oh, so we're talking here about cattle coming from New Mexico, Oklahoma, Texas. The average price for these cattle has risen this year from just under $200 per pound, and that price on the axis there says $100. It says dollars per hundredweight. That's kind of the industry standard. But if you just think divided by 100, that gives you your per pound price. So $2 per pound. Just below that at the beginning of the year, and now they're running like $2.40 per pound for a slaughter steer from the Southern Plains. And look at that. That's like basically double what the average was for the 5-year period between 2019 and 2023. So, the fact that we have so few cattle has caused steers to, has our cattle prices up, which will ultimately leads to beef prices being so high. So if you want to move to the next slide.
Okay.
This actually shows what part of the problem is. And that is what happened was in 2008, we had the 2007, 2008, we had the financial crisis. Well, that of course actually did, also lead to.
Is it this one? I'm sorry. Is it this one?
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
that's good. That's good.
Okay, good.
So we had the financial crisis, and the financial crisis actually took a big hit to the industry, and that also helped to enable the herd to start downsizing. But also what happened was in the early 2010s, we had this massive drought. And so this graph shows 2012. This is what is called the drought monitor. This is something USDA puts out, and you can look this up. You can just Google drought monitor, and you can bring this up. And there's a lot of really cool stuff that USDA has weather information, or at least they used to. I don't know how this is going to carry forward as we proceed. But what you can see here is this is an example from August of 2012. And this graph, what this shows, this isn't showing you what conditions are. This shows what conditions are compared to what they should be. So in other words, this is basically saying this is the deviation from the norm. And we had in 2012, we had this massive drought. And then if you can pull up the next graph, it's basically showing the drought monitor from 2 years later. And it just shows basically the same kind of thing. And what I was just really trying to illustrate there is that we had this multi-year, profoundly bad drought that really hit much of the United States, but it really hit much of the cattle production regions in the U.S. And what you'll see from this drought, this next map, is that one of the biggest areas where we had cattle production in Texas, the panhandle of Texas, just had a massive drought that lasts for a long time. And in fact, it caused a plant to close, and it put the town in jeopardy because of how many cattle were just basically liquidated because of the drought, because they couldn't afford to feed them. And it isn't just that these are cattle production areas. These are also areas where, we're raising hay and cattle feed. And so all this stuff really it really just shattered the industry and really caused serious problems. And that is what caused that real trough in the cattle supply, the cattle herd. And we have not dug out of that, and we have not been able to. Yeah.
Okay.
So you can see that. So you can see in the panhandle of Texas how bad things really were, and like I said, these graphs, these images are 2 years apart, but that drought was going on that whole time, and so any drought monitor that you'd look at between those two periods, and even before and after, you would see massive amounts of impacted areas, and many of these areas were cattle production areas or regions where they grow food for the cattle, and so it just was a massive problem. And of course, what this means is that, again, neoliberalism is causing us to not think about the environment. Well, this stuff is affecting our cattle production capacity, So we have, even though, yes, we don't have the drought that we had back then, we still continue to have weather problems. It does affect these industries. And, we just basically oh, hi, Ari. We basically just stick our head in the sand and just continue to allow these problems to fester. And it is affecting our ability to grow beef and, be able to buy beef at reasonable prices. So, ignoring the climate change is not. That's also not going to help the cattle situation, the beef situation. So,
yes. I know that. I know, like, for example, the quality. I know that certain parts of Latin America, I know that from Nicaragua, it was because of the hot climate that the quality of the beef is a little bit different from Argentina, which has a climate comparable, I guess, to the United States too. And that kind of affects things as far as the quality is concerned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. Definitely. Yeah. When it's hot, the animals don't want to feed. And then you have to be more careful about when you keeping the meat, in temperature wise and everything. And that's another thing. One of the concerns. So let me allay some of the concerns. I know that there are concerns about the quality of the beef in Argentina. Argentina, has a long tradition of beef production, and the Argentinians are some of the most they're some of the highest beef eating people in the world, highest protein eating people in the world. It's not the issue with Argentina was, for a while we weren't importing our meat from Argentina because there were issues with foot and mouth disease, and it wasn't really just Argentina. I mean, just kind of in Central South America, there tends to be, some issues. I'm sure it's just environmental, but all the countries, and you're talking about Paraguay, Uruguay, Brazil, Argentina, even Chile, they all produce beef, and they all, have taken this issue of foot and mouth disease pretty seriously. So there haven't been, what I've seen shows that there hasn't been foot and mouth disease issues since 2005. And so that's why then we were able to start importing beef from Argentina again because basically they got it under control. But so there's not there's not really a quality issue. And like I said, most of this beef that's imported usually ends up going to hamburger. So I wouldn't, I don't think that there's a quality issue you need to worry about. One thing, I guess, what concerns me more is the fact that the administration is, they tend to be more pushing inspection. All meat in the U.S. is inspected and it's either inspected federally or by the states. And so the federal government kind of sets the standard, and the states can't. They can't have lower standards than the federal government. However, this administration does seem to be pushing, they seem to be more trying to push inspections more onto the states for meat to be, and that's not necessarily inherently a bad thing, but the issue is, of course, with the states is always, well, there's more of them, will there be quality concerns and stuff like that. But basically, the only problem with for like you have to have meat inspected federally if you're going to sell it interstate, and most meat in the U.S. has been inspected federally. It sounds like they want to kind of change it, push it down. Not all meat is going to be sold, interstate, and and some of the smaller, and I think you also, smaller operations, I think, don't have to use the federal as well. But I guess I'd be a little bit concerned if they're gonna might possibly be a little more lax, but I don't know. At this point, we can't really say. So
okay. Yes. Yeah. Do you have any final words? I can just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. I mean, I think the thing of it is that I think what this industry shows is that it is really not a good thing to just all of a sudden impose this kind of dramatic change in the way we tax things. And with that, there's been no recognition of the complexity of these various industries. The beef industry certainly shows something as simple as a hamburger, you wouldn't think it's that complicated, but this is a very complicated and very sophisticated industry. And there's a lot of issues. And I think one, there are a lot of issues that can be affected by this. And also there's a lot of issues that I think we need to consider when, people say, well, it might be simple. We just import more beef, and that's going to lower the price. Well, no, not necessarily. How much is going to be imported? What's it going to be used for? How's it going to be distributed? One of the things that I didn't get to talk about, and I think it's really important, is also to understand that this is an industry that, you have these farmers that are producing, they're producing beef, and they are, for the most part, they don't have, for the most part, they're kind of, decentralized, right? Individual producers and stuff like that. Then you have very few processors. Then the other thing is you have very few retailers. And so the production aspect is just the start of this stream. And what the processors do and what the retailers do, they have a lot of opportunity between them to capture whatever price advantages might come about from imports. And so it isn't necessarily the case that the consumers are going to benefit, because the processors might decide, okay, well, we can take this gain. The retailers, they can decide that they're going to take it. And in fact, both processors and the retailers, they have very complicated pricing schemes. And the retailers, they do a lot of things like, this time we're heading into the time of the year where they're going to push things like roasts, turkeys, whole tenderloins, things like that, or these high-end cuts. And so they're going to have pricing. They're going to have pricing practices that they use to draw people to come in, and they will maybe price things in ways that don't necessarily even aren't necessarily even we don't necessarily always understand for ourselves, because they're doing things like trying to bring people in and trying to get you to spend money on various things that they can make money off of. So in other words, they have their pricing schemes, and they aren't necessarily consistent with what we might think of as, okay, now there's a bunch more hamburger on the market, so hamburger prices should come down. So anyway.
It's this time of year and everything, and probably be getting some prime rib, right, for Christmas and all of that. So, I'm getting hungry thinking about that, and thinking, in spite of the drugs I'm taking. But and I never really gave it a lot of thought about it until recently, with the conversation I had the other day, and then with this conversation we're having right here, right now, so just it's amazing. Like you said, is something basic as meat is more complex than it seems to, than meets the eye.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as I was saying earlier, before we got on, there's also these complications too, that the industry was one of the first to be deunionized. The Iowa beef processors in the 1970s made it their mission to destroy the meat packers union, and they did. But that also, and they did it by bringing workers in from other countries. And basically really not treating those workers fairly either. And now we continue
insourcing.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Right. And so there's a lot of complicating factors, but yet this is an industry that we see aspects of problems throughout the economy. We see in this industry as well. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about these things, because I think there's many different aspects of it that really bring up a wide variety of social issues in this country. And but yet offering simple solutions like, oh, well, we'll just have a tariff. Well, that's not going to help. And then just importing more beef. Well, that may be a solution, that may seem like it might be helpful, but yet we're talking about a very small amount, and really in the end it's not going to help. What we really need is something to try to help the producers, really help the consumers really more, because the producers, they're doing the best that they can at this point. But right now we're in a situation where consumers, we have a strong demand, and it's not just here in the US. We've had economic growth for several decades now that has increased demand for beef around the world. And so American consumers are competing on a worldwide basis for that beef. So anyway.
Right. Let's see. I guess so. Well, if you want to come back on the show, we can talk some more about this issue and or any other issue you want to talk about. It's always great having you here. And Sal, I'll talk to you real quick after the show.
Okay, that
Yeah.
sounds great.
Okay. And everyone, just want to thank you, Sherry, for showing up, Dr. Sherry Weiss. And I'll provide your information on the description box. Go ahead.
You know what? I'm sorry, I forgot to mention. I'm really sorry. I know you're in a hurry. I just want to mention there's some other some YouTube creators that I think are also really interesting in this subject. One of the people is a person by the name of Sarah Tabor, who does both a YouTube channel and a Substack called Farm to Tabor. That's really a good one. Another one is a guy who has a channel called Large Man Abroad. And this is really interesting because he is someone who is was a soldier. He was in the Marines. And then after the Marines, he left and he traveled around the world. And then he got married and came back to the US. And so he has an interesting take on having lived around the world and then now living here. And he has some really interesting takes. He also grew up around a lot of farmers too. So he has some takes on that. So I would highly recommend those two YouTube channels. So, and I'm sorry. Also the Back 40, which is a group that's trying to get organized, that's being organized by a guy named Will Westmoreland, who is, I think he's a political person, but he's also a farmer. So the Back 40 is an interesting group as well.
All right. Okay. And everyone, Dr. Sherry Weiss, and as I said, I hope you come back on the show soon. It's always great talking to you. And if you like what you heard, please press like and comment. Comment any ways you disagree with what I have to say. We'll have a conversation. Feel free to share any information I have on this channel. As the First Amendment absolute, this is my duty to inform you to create your own platform and utilize it because we're the muckrakers of our time. Reject corporate media. Free and pardon Ed Snowden. Free Palestine. Free healthcare for all. Preserve our free speech rights. And I will see you all next time. And y'all take care.